Hey everybody. Let's see, week 9. We're moving along here pretty quickly. Just a couple things from week 8. Um, what I really wanted you to get from that week was the idea that when you're trying to measure the performance of individual officers, not the department, but individual officers, it's pretty difficult under community policing. And as a supervisor, that becomes a very subjective matter when it comes to review time. And if you've ever worked in a business where non-objective, subjective measures of performance have affected your review, that's a tough deal when you think you're doing a good job and you're not, or you think somebody that's getting a better review and a better raise because of it is basically bamboozling the boss. In the professional model, arrests, tickets, those kind of things, at least we're supervisors like that because it's easier for them to quantify. Now, one thing that came up a few times that I want to really make clear is California prohibits quotas. California Vehicle Code Section 41600 at SEC is very clear about established quotas. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not pressure on officers to produce more. And how that works is there's no formal system. You have to have 5 arrests, 10 tickets in a month. How this works is you have a system where everybody's stats are published. And it's an informal way to create competition. So if I look at the stat sheet and I had 5 arrests the prior month and the leader had 10 arrests, well, as I'm trying to compete, that's going to push me more to working harder to find arrests. And the same goes with citations and other objective measures of performance. So there is no formal quota. A little disappointing, I guess, on my part or for me, because so many people come into the course with, an idea from, from TV or something they heard from their buddy or a movie they saw. They figure that field training is just like training day, and that's how that works, and that there's whatever other TV show is on is how police work actually works, and it'd be the same thing as if you were going to medical school and you were doing your residency and you're watching ER or one of those shows, and it would show a wholly unrealistic approach with constant barrage of major traumas coming in the door and on and on. So as you look at things that are controversial, take a moment to decide if you're looking at it through the lens of of a person who's not a student of criminal justice, and that can be whether or not you're in the business as a student, which I had a boss who made that comment that all officers should be a student of the business, always trying to learn. And I think that's really good for anybody in any business, but especially in criminal justice, whether you're an attorney or a street cop or probation officer or a police manager. Really important. The other thing that I wanted you to pick up from the last week was the idea that community policing's goals for officers are really vague. How do you quantify what a person does? Do they drive around and smile? I mean, do they wave at people? Are they nice to everybody? Do they get few complaints? Now, complaints also are a part of the professional model. And the difficult part is if you're doing enforcement, you're going to get complaints. Um, if you're not doing anything, then you probably won't get complaints. People won't even complain about the aspect of what's going on in their neighborhood. They're going to be, you're just not going to hear from them. Now, for some supervisors, that's great because supervisors don't like handling complaints. Um, and most usually, it's a complaint that the officer didn't speak to me properly, wasn't nice to me, did something of a service level. We'll talk about this in upcoming weeks when we talk about policing the police. You know, very few, very few of the, uh, astonishingly small amounts of police complaints are to the level of corrupt activities or, unlawful uses of force. The ones that we see on TV, um, the Ferguson problem, the New York City problem, those are so rare, but they're celebrated, so everybody hears about them. You know, I've used her a couple times in the course, but in the case of Lindsay Lohan, how many people have you heard of that have had driver's license problems that are celebrities? Pretty much Lindsay, and then a few others, DUIs and that kind of stuff. But um, it'd be very few, but they're celebrated cases. So that's another issue with community policing. One student talked about an incident where somebody had observed, or she'd observed people using drugs, and cops were close and they didn't do anything. And we'll assume that the cops saw what was going on. Well, is that in community policing, the police are supposed to listen to what the community is saying about particular problems. So, assuming that they saw this, and they weren't just being flat lazy, which is always a possibility, but they're not being lazy. They're sitting in the police car, maybe not as attentive as they should have been, which is kind of what it sounds like. But are they listening to the community? Remember, the voters have passed legalization of marijuana, and voters of all, or not voters, but the legislature has moved to a model of treatment away from enforcement. And by that I mean there's a California Health and Safety Code section that says that if somebody is taking certain drugs and they overdose and they call, or they feel like they've overdosed and they call the police for help, they can't be arrested. It's not a criminal offense, even though they are under the influence. So the legislature and the people have moved towards what a lot of cops call, and you'll hear it again, catch and release policing, where you'll fishing and you catch a fish and you throw it back and you let it swim off and do whatever fish do, as opposed to catching the fish and making dinner with it. So catch and release policing. That's kind of the idea behind some of the thoughts that I had on Chapter 8. Chapter 9, the brief introduction to criminal procedure. I pay attention in this and I take notes because you're going to see a lot of this again in 350. It's going to be packaged much differently because of the way that people write books about criminal procedure. What they're doing in Crim Pro is they will take a particular exception to the Fourth Amendment, and then they will write about the exception. I do it the other way around, and I write about the times that it's applied. When do you apply the Fourth Amendment? And what we're going to do is, when you go through this, you're going to see it broken down, the Fourth Amendment broken down into a couple of different areas. First is going to be seizures of persons. When can you stop somebody? I'd be really careful to understand this because we will have a discussion about stop and frisk a little bit later in the course. And if you don't understand when the police can detain somebody, then you have the potential to think, oh, stop and frisk is just awful. Well, no, if it's being applied properly, enforced by supervisors, enforced by district attorneys, enforced by the courts, then stop and frisk is a very valuable tool, and it's almost, I can't stress how important it is. So you'll learn about seizures of persons, and that's going to be uh, consensual encounters. Hi, how you doing? Can I talk to you for a minute? Detentions and arrests. The next section is going to be seizures of persons. I'm sorry, searches of persons. When can you search a person? And it's pretty limited. We'll talk about, here's the idea. In any section, you're going to see 3 times you can search a person. Warrant, consent, exigency. Those 3 times. In search of a person, it would be maybe DUI, where you're going to take blood from them. Now a search warrant's required. Fairly new approach from the courts because of the feeling that warrants are pretty easy to get. And we won't have a chance to talk too much about it, but there's some stuff out there that I'm kind of concerned about being ways to get around search warrants as opposed to the proper way to do things. So that's the first issue. Second issue is, our second way would be consent. And anybody can consent to get into their constitutional rights. If a person pleads guilty, they consent to giving up their right to trial. And then exigency, some sort of a life-threatening emergency, and I mean, I put a pretty high bar on it, or significant felony, serious felony. So say the police come to the front door of a residence and knock on the door, party call, and there's a table by the door with a bunch of methamphetamine on it. Well, that's probably going to qualify for a warrantless entry. Doesn't mean the police can search the house, but they can gather everybody up. Anything they see while they're gathering people and putting them into a safe location can be seized under that plain view doctrine, meaning that the police have a lawful right to be there and its immediate illegal nature, try this again, and its illegal nature is immediately apparent. So, consent, or exigency, I'm sorry, warrant, consent, exigency. And then in searches of persons, we'll talk about some other ways that the police can do a warrantless search without, or a warrantless search, period. Fourth Amendment requires a couple things. First off, all good note stuff here. First off, the Fourth Amendment requires that the police have a warrant and that any search is reasonable. Any search that is unreasonable requires that warrant. A case that you'll talk about in 350 quite at length is going to be Katz, U.S. versus Katz, K-A-T-Z. And in Katz, the court decided that, or suggested in dictum, which is not the holding of the case, but other important things that they have to say about the case, that all warrantless searches are per se illegal unless it meets certain narrow exceptions. And that's what we talk about in Fourth Amendment in criminal procedure. One other concept that I want you to be really aware of is the rule of law. And the rule of law says that governmental authority is only legitimately exercised in accordance with written, publicly disclosed laws and enforced with well-established procedure. So, what that means is legislature has to pass a law. Now, it's interesting because administrative law in the United States now is huge. It's just burgeoning. And that's somebody who was never elected, who was appointed, given a job, now makes a rule that you and I have to abide by. Kind of an interesting process when you look at the rule of law. Good rule of law is a good thing for you to have in your back pocket, as far as understanding what it really is. And then enforce in accordance with well-established procedures. Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendment. The government follows those Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendment issues. So, move back here for a second to where we were. Let's talk about the next area of Fourth Amendment, and that's searches of buildings. Buildings fairly easy, can be searched in one of three ways: warrant, consent, exigency. If it's a different way, then there's a different process. Then a warrant must be used, but all of the cases will define exigency, will define consent, and so buildings, including residences, are pretty simple as far as the general rule. Next, we have searches of vehicles, and it's the same thing: warrant, consent, exigency, and then a few other exceptions. But knowing those exceptions, if you're going into law enforcement, is essential. It really is. I can't stress it. And it makes your job so much easier because you know the general rule. You continue to learn about the cases as a student of the profession, and you will you won't make many mistakes. And any mistakes you make will be will be in an attempt to be reasonable, and will keep you out of civil liability. Extremely important. And then the last thing we talk about in Fourth Amendment are special searches. After the special searches, that is probation parole searches, highly regulated businesses, such as people that handle explosives, bars, another highly regulated business, and auto repair, another highly regulated business, subject to warrantless searches under various conditions. The next thing we talk about is the Fifth Amendment, and this will help you define what Miranda really means. Miranda, and then later U.S. versus Dickerson. That is such an ingrained part of American culture. It's almost too funny. And you'll learn about what is custody. You'll learn about what is interrogation. The two big issues in Miranda: what's custody and what's interrogation. And there's a bunch of cases off of that. So you'll stay busy in 350 on those particular cases. And if you're going into business, I would make certain you take the time to learn about that. And kind of the way that I would do it, as I'm sitting here thinking about it, is I would go fourth, fifth, and sixth. I would make paragraphs, outline headings for each of the type of searches. And then I would also make outline headings for interrogation, custodial interrogation, custody interrogation, and down the line, so you have an outline that you can review, for 350, and you're going to be so far ahead of the game, it's going to be funny, or it won't even be funny. Maybe it'll be funny, hopefully. Although it depends how you get for 350, I guess. Hey, Sixth Amendment. Sixth Amendment are your right to counsel, right to trial, right to a public trial, and a couple of other things that pertain to the trial. You need to know that because that's part of Miranda. Miranda discusses Sixth Amendment rights, and you need to have a handle on that, and that's pretty fertile area for examination. So you should be aware of that. And then kind of bouncing back in and out, one other thing that I want you to make sure that you have a good handle on is the purpose of the Constitution. And I'll tell you right now, I have a test question, it might even be in this exam, where I ask, what's the purpose of the Constitution? And I get a ton of people that get that wrong because they say it's to protect the rights of the people. And it's wrong. The purpose of the Constitution is to outline the powers of government, when the government can do something. And at times you'll see the courts go to great lengths to call something within the power of the government. Probably a prime example was the Affordable Care Act, which is currently under some attack in Congress. Well, the Affordable Care Act, the government has to have a purpose. They have to have a power before they can do something, before they can enact the Affordable Health Care Act. So what they do is, what happens is Congress, when they put that together as the power to support their authority, they said that the Affordable Health Care Act affected interstate commerce. So if a Billy Joe Bob in Texas had a cold and couldn't go to work as his job of delivering newspapers at 4 o'clock in the morning, and he missed several days because he didn't have health insurance, Congress said, well, that affects interstate commerce because somebody could get the newspaper, open the business section, see something that they didn't like or they did like, take action within the economy, maybe buy stocks or sell stocks. That affects interstate commerce. Well, the problem is that would give Congress the power to regulate every single thing that you do. You can only drive cars on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday due to smog. You had to take sustainable energy platforms to school Tuesday, Thursday. Why? Because it affects interstate commerce. You can only eat certified organic food. Now, believe me, there's a lot of folks that would think that's a great deal. But Congress could say the power is because of interstate commerce. You're not able to work if you're not in your best physical condition. So you can see where that could be a problem, and that's what the court said. But the court did something interesting in that they rewrote part of the act, and they said, no, the Affordable Health Care Act isn't authorized by interstate commerce. It's authorized by Congress's power to tax. Because that's the last thing that those who are in charge of the development of the Affordable Health Care Act wanted it labeled as a tax. Not at all. That's why they went that great leap for the Interstate Commerce Clause. So, Constitution, powers of government, Bill of Rights, rights of the people, first, second, fourth, fifth, sixth, eighth amendments, and then the powers of the state, which are in the 10th Amendment. Okay, so that's this week. I think I did a little better time-wise. I will see y'all in class.